Hello there, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time. Once again, let's talk metal. Tonight, I want to be revisiting a topic that I made a video on a while back. In that video, I was talking about albums who were candidates to be the earliest modern heavy metal record released by an American band. And by modern heavy metal, I was specifically referring to things that clearly have like a Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, new wave of British heavy metal influence, that new sound of heavy metal that came along in the late 1970s. There are, of course, lots of American bands who played heavy metal in the 1970s, even going back to the late 1960s with Blue Cheer. But, throughout a lot of the 70s, bands still tended to be very influenced by things like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, things that by today's standards we often refer to as hard rock or classic rock. These were bands that had a very clear blues influence in their sound and their song structure. The albums very often had some heavy tracks, some proggy tracks, maybe a couple of radio friendly tracks, a ballad, something experimental. It's things that we hear on lots of those 70s records that kind of disappeared by the time you get into the late 70s and early 80s, when bands focused on playing all headbangers all the time. And in that video, I came up with some candidates, especially around like the 1980 time frame, but a couple of things from the later 70s that deserved mention and some consideration for the title of earliest heavy metal album by a US band in the modern heavy metal sense. The video was really fun to make. It got a lot of really cool comments from people. And thank you if you're someone who left a comment on that video. If you haven't seen the video, by all means, check it out on my channel. Something that came up in several of the comments were people asking about specific singles. And folks like, but Alan, what about this single? Or, hey, did you forget about this single? And I didn't forget about the singles. I just didn't have time to include them in that video because the video was already building up to be pretty long. So I intentionally decided to wait and include the videos the singles in their own video at a later time. And so that's where we're at now. So I want to look at some of the singles that could be contenders for earliest single to get put out by a US band that has that modern heavy metal sound, where they really clearly heard Sad Wings of Destiny or Stained Class and decided they were going to take that ball and run with it, rather than just copying early Black Sabbath or Deep Purple or Led Zeppelin or that stuff. Now, there are a ton of singles from that era out there. By no means is this meant to be a comprehensive list. There's no way I could do that. As you go back into the 70s, my collection gets pretty sparse pretty quickly. So I'm just going to be mentioning a few that I'm aware of, some names that often come up in this conversation when folks are talking about really early US metal singles. And I'll be showing a few things that, I think deserve a mention, and I'll play a few clips along the way too, so you can make up your own mind. Judge for yourself. Should some of these things be considered modern heavy metal, or are they still more of a 70s kind of metal sound? So with all that out of the way, let's get started. Now, where do we start? Well, turns out there's a lot of interesting singles from 1979 and 1980. So many, in fact, that those will be getting their own videos. This video is going to focus on things that came out before 1979. So I want to start with 1978 releases and work my way backwards and go through some, again, potential contenders for the title of first modern metal single by a US band. Now, clearly, in 78, there's not a lot of things that immediately leap out at you as being, a true raging, headbanging slab of steel or anything. A lot of things are still operating a little bit more in, true 70s heavy metal hard rock territory. But there are some things that, I'll mention because, again, they're ones that have either come up a lot or, they have a little bit of heaviness to them, maybe. The first one is a name that we're all familiar with. 78 is when Don Dokken released his very first single. This, of course, is pre-George Lynch. This has Hard Luck, was it Hard Rock Woman or Hard Luck Woman? Hard Rock Woman and Broken Heart, both excellent songs. Really like the single quite a bit. But this is well before Dokken got into his sort of AOR hair metal kind of sounds that he became world famous for. Both the tracks on here are really, really good. They rock out nicely. Don't think there's anything on here that quite fits the bill for a modern heavy metal type of release, but it definitely is worth mentioning that Dokken, is getting on the map there. Some other examples of things that fall a bit short that I've seen mentioned before. A single by a band called Freight with What Kind of Love and Love No More. The fact that both song titles have love in the title probably tells you this one's not quite going to make the cut. But, at least one of the songs here does have a little bit of heaviness to it in the riffs. So there's something to it. This one's supposed to have a picture sleeve, by the way, but I've never come across a picture with the sleeve for a price that I wanted to pay. Another one that kind of falls in this category of close, but still not really a contender is an old single by a band called Smokehouse. This one, again, not bad tracks, but still very much solidly in the 70s hard rock and metal camp. Something to note about these, trying to track these things down, you'll find them listed with all kind of different genre titles. Some people will list these as like, private heavy metal press, but other people will list them as like, 70s bonehead rock or bonehead crushers or just, private hard rock release, garage rock release. So yeah, even seeing the labels when you come across them on things like eBay or sales lists can be pretty confusing. You don't always know exactly what you're going to get when you buy one of these. So you've got a lot of that kind of stuff coming out in 78, but then you do have a couple of things that are a bit heavier, or at least have hints of heaviness. So we'll look at a couple of these in a little more detail. And for this, we got to go down to Texas. The first one out of Texas to mention is a 12-inch EP. So cheating a little bit, not quite a single, but definitely not a full album either. It's by a band called Blitz. And it came in this kind of eye-catching cutout cover. These used to be called disco covers. Maybe they still are. But yeah, 12-inch release, 4 tracks on it. Most of the material on here still fits pretty nicely into 70s rock metal territory. But one of the tracks in particular does have a little bit more of a metallic bite to it, and that's going to be the first thing that we take a little bit of a listen to tonight. So let's check out a little bit of Blitz's Little Victim.
Treat you right. Well, she's the queen of the streets, someone who you like to meet. Let me go, let me
go. All right, so there is a sample from Blitz's Little Victim. So yeah, again, you're getting a little bit more of a heavy metal buzz, to the riffs there. It's getting a little harder, a little more edgier there. So it's interesting. It's definitely an interesting one when this conversation comes up. Would I call it a modern heavy metal record? No, not overall. But that one track, it definitely deserves at least a footnote, I think. Vocals maybe a little rough on that one, but the guitar is driving it in a pretty heavy metal direction. All right, I mentioned there's one other candidate from Texas in 1978. And we'll get back to real 7-inch singles at this point. This one's by a band called AXXE. They were out of the Lubbock, Texas area. And with AXXE, they did release a follow-up album in 79, but they changed their name to Impeccable. Kind of an odd name, but I guess they wanted something a little more distinct than just AXXE. The AXXE single is always been kind of a pain to track down. I've actually owned 3 different copies of it, and this is the only one I've ever had with a picture sleeve. One of the big selling points on AXXE was they had a real hotshot guitarist named Darren Welch, did some amazing work with the band, both on the single and on the full length. So I'm going to check out clips of both tracks on this one because they're both pretty good. First one we're going to listen to is the beginning of Rock Away the City.
Ready to roll. I tell you, no one's gonna stop the solution, no matter how hard they try. We're rocking in a state of confusion. Babe, don't let it pass you by.
All right, so there's a little bit of the A side, Rock Away the City. Again, it's not far removed from 70s hard rock anthem territory, but yeah, the guitars are showing off quite a bit there, getting pretty flashy on the lead work. All right, I also want to play just a little clip of the B-side, Through the Night. Now, this one I will skip into it. It has a little bit of just kind of a slow, moody interlude to get it going. So once I hit play here, I want to skip forward to about the 50-second mark. So this will be Through the Night.
Feel the fortune of gifts untold. Find the light within the dark. Breathe the hate within your heart. Don't bring the light of day. Got you every step of the way. Let the wrong become the right. Forever onward through the night. Light mercy. Souls made free. Lightning strikes.
All right, so a little bit of the flip side there. This one I really like quite a bit. It reminds me more than just a little bit of very early Riot, during like the Guy Speranza era in particular. And Rock City from 77 was one of those albums that I had listed as a contender for earliest modern heavy metal album by a US band. I would be pretty surprised if the guys in AXXE had not checked out Rock City. I mean, even the fact that the A side is called Rock Away the City, maybe there's a little hidden tip of the hat to Riot there. Don't know. Maybe that's a stretch. I can't say for sure. But again, both songs still fit nicely in the 70s hard rock paradigm. But with the guitar work, the pacing, they're getting there. If Riot's Rock City can be considered early modern US metal, I think the AXXE single can be put in that same exact category. All right, so a couple of interesting things starting out already here, but now we're going to back up a year to 1977 and see what we can find there. A couple of these I don't have, so I just want to mention some things in passing. There's a single by a band called Sweet Crystal that came out in 77 that some folks put on these kind of lists. Sweet Crystal was out of Michigan, and they were a Christian rock band. They actually had a pretty long career. They kept putting out lots of material over time. But yeah, they did have one single that came out in 77. One of the songs is, as you'd expect, a little more ballady, radio friendly. The other song has, more of, the hard rock sound to it. Personally, I wouldn't call Sweet Crystal, modern heavy metal at all. Don't think it quite gets there, but it's one that I see come up in conversation sometime. Folks have sent it to me as like, hey, have you heard this early metal single? I'm just like, I've heard it. Not sure I agree with that label for it, but maybe that's just me. Another one that's kind of in the same boat is a single by a San Francisco Bay Area band called Killer Watt. And Killer Watt was apparently fairly well known on the San Francisco, LA music scene at the time. The single, in my opinion, is really nothing special. I don't hear anything on it that I would call modern heavy metal whatsoever. But it's notable because several of the guys in the band did go on to play with acts in the early 80s that were either metal or metal adjacent. I believe its bassist Terry Nails actually did play with Ozzy, and other members of the band also played with acts like Aldo Nova and Night Ranger. Yes, I know Night Ranger is not heavy metal unless you were, like in 1981 and had a perm and a collared shirt, and a convertible and thought you were heavy or something. But if nothing else, Killer Watt's notable because, yeah, those guys had fairly notable music careers with bands that were, part of the conversation, at least in the early 80s. Another one to mention in that same vein, and also an LA band, is Bad Axe. And this one I do have a copy of. So we're talking about this single, Cry for Me, again from 77. Bad Axe is notable for featuring a very young Dana Strum, who went on to play with Vinnie Vincent Invasion and later the band Slaughter. Yes, I know that's not exactly, the most true metal, street cred that you could ever have. It's not Ronnie James Dio or anything, but hey, Vinnie Vincent Invasion, Slaughter, you could do worse. But yeah, Dan actually traces his origins back to Bad Axe here. The band did this single. They had some other releases, including there was an album recorded back around this time frame that never got a proper release. And it was one of those things dug up much, much later, I think in the early 2000s maybe, and finally got a proper pressing. This one gets mentioned a lot. Someone, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who, but someone mentioned this one in particular in the comments of my previous video about these early American metal releases. I think a big part of the appeal here, one, there's a little bit of a metal connection with the Vinnie Vincent connection and such. Two, the cover is, very much fitting in that, fantasy heavy metal vibe. You look at this, you flip past this, and you're going to stop and check it out and be like, oh, I wonder if that's heavy metal or not. Musically, I probably have to say this one, no, doesn't quite get there. I like this one. I mean, I tracked it down and paid money for it, so I must like it a little bit. But yeah, this one to me still has, both feet pretty solid in the 70s camp. One of the songs has a little bit more of a funky breakdown at times. It's not bad, but can't really call this heavy metal per se, not by modern heavy metal standards. But it's one that deserved a mention. I know folks have that one in mind when they talk about these. Last one I'll mention. Now this one, you see this one in the racks when you're flipping past singles, you will keep right on flipping because there is no reason for you to stop and look at this. By a band called Child. And not a whole lot to see there. The band did do a full-length album. I'm thinking the album got much better artwork than this. But yeah, the single here, again, this is a classic case of where one side is very much just a throwaway kind of fluff song. But the other side, Keep Moving, it has a little bit of metal threaded into it, just a little bit. Let's actually give this one a quick listen so you can judge for yourself. So here's a little bit of Keep Moving by Child. All right, right, there is a little bit of Child's Keep Moving. Not a bad little tune, decent vocalist, like that gnarly little guitar sound, which yeah, it's got a little bit of that fuzz, a little bit of that nastiness to it. Where is this going to, challenge Rain in Blood for title of, most extreme metal ever? No, of course not. But this is 1977. It's getting there. It's got something a little heavier than what you'd hear on your typical 70s hard rock album. All right, so let's work our way back a little bit more. 1976, I found a few things that I thought were worth mentioning. And again, these aren't going to quite make it to metal status, but you see some signs. The first one of these is by a band that I know nothing about, except they made this one single. They are called Jambalaya, which is a pretty catchy name. You would assume that they were, a New Orleans band, Louisiana band or something. But if I remember right, the stamps on here indicate that it was probably a California act, more of a West Coast deal. This one, Feel Free, not very memorable, but some sign shows, again, some signs of life on it. And actually, let's check out just a little bit of this one. Here we go with Some Sign. From Jambalaya, Some Sign. There's some very obvious Thin Lizzy-isms going on in that one, I think. Nice guitar work, nice anthemic feel, very strong vocal performance as well. So yeah, not a bad little tune. Modern metal, no, but it is definitely worth a shout out, just for, the blatant Thin Lizzy kind of stylings, if nothing else. All right, sticking to 76, another one that comes up from time to time is released by a guy named Johnny Barnes. If I remember right, he was out of New Jersey, maybe Pennsylvania area, and he did a decent number of recordings. I believe, pretty sure this is his first one. The single, one of the sides is, again, pretty forgettable, but Angel of Inspiration has some memorable moments on it. So let's check out Angel of Inspiration and see what that one has to offer. So yeah, the Johnny Barnes track, again, guitar work is sizzling a little bit. You've got a pretty heavy backbeat to it. Now, the song has its ups and downs if you go all the way through it. In the chorus, he's actually got sort of like backing female vocalists who come on with this almost kind of like Supremes kind of shouting out of the title, which doesn't work very well in my opinion. But Yeah, in terms of what's going on with the instrumentation, this is, a notch heavier than what you might expect from a lot of things in 76. It's signs of life for some of these early ones. Something that's interesting with the Johnny Barnes single as well. This is one that has been featured in some of the different acid archive type compilations that have come out. I'm pretty sure one of the songs is on one of the volumes of the Brown Acid series, for example. And a lot of times the singles featured on those things are hideously rare and sell for an awful lot of money if you can even find them. This one's kind of an exception. I don't know whether they just made a million copies of this single or if they saved every single one of them since 1976. But yeah, this single has never been hard to find, and it's like a $5 record. So yeah, for $5, you get one pretty cool tune that is kind of a little unusually heavy for the date that we're looking at. All right, let's see. One more thing that I wanted to mention from 1976 was the band Spike. And some of you will know Spike as the first project by one David Chastain. This is their one and only album, The Price of Pleasure. This came out much later, around 83, if I remember right. But Spike did make several singles. They made 3 in particular that I know of, and the earliest one goes back to 1976. So this is where David Chastain first got on the map with Spike out of Cincinnati, Ohio. I don't have a copy of that first single. I have the other 2 they did, but I don't have the earliest one. So let's just take a listen to a quick clip from something they did here in 76. And this will be, if I can find where I'm at here. Yeah, this will be a clip of the track called Porno Queen. Okay, so I don't think we're going to be calling that modern heavy metal at all, but yeah, it's again a young David Chastain starting to try out some music ideas. The other 2 singles get a little better, and by the time they did the LP in 83, they have a much stronger sound. I like the album quite a bit, but yeah, they trace their roots back to 76 as well. So again, deserving of at least a footnote. All right, now getting before 76, I really have only found one more thing that's worth mentioning. 75 wasn't it, though. Only singles I have from 75 that are kind of oddball ones by a band named Damrod. It's a good 70s hard rock sound. I like it quite a bit, but it's owing a lot more to sort of, a moody, atmospheric 70s vibe. There's more than a passing nod to Deep Purple on it, for example. So yeah, the last entry that I wanted to throw out there goes actually back to 72, which, yeah, weird that it was kind of this big gap. But again, I don't know all the stuff that came out from this era. It's definitely before my time, and it's not the area I collect on real heavy. But there was a single that came out in 72 that, again, I think deserves a mention here. It's another Texas band, interestingly enough, and it's by a band that went by the initials TNS, which stood for Take No Shit. I shit you not. So right away, you've got, the kind of, heavy attitude there. And the single, one side of the single was a cover song. It covered a kind of bluesy number from 1970. It was done by a band called Chicken Shack originally. But the flip side, Time's Up, once again, has a little more rawness to it. So let's check out a clip of Time's Up. All right, so yeah, there's some of Time's Up from TNS out of Texas in 1972, and that's got a pretty heavy vibe to it. Now, that single's another one that has been featured on some of these different analog acid archives collections, and that one's been known to collectors for a pretty long time. It's a tough single to find and a relatively expensive one. I do not have a copy of it. It's a cool one. I'd pick it up if I could ever find it for a decent price, but you don't see it often and you don't see it cheap. Again, is it modern heavy metal? No, but it's much heavier than you would expect to hear from things in 1972. So I thought it'd be a fun one to include here. And that is going to bring us to the end of this one. So is there anything here that could really pass as modern heavy metal? For my money, the only one would be the AXXE single from 1978. I think if you're going to call things like early Riot heavy metal in a modern sensibility, then I think AXXE fits the bill as well. The other ones that I've shown off, no, I would not put those under the category of modern heavy metal at all. But hopefully, as I've demonstrated with some descriptions and some song clips along the way, they do show bands trying out some heavy ideas, trying to get a little heavier tone or a little sharper edge on their guitar work than would have been typical for, just a commercial friendly radio band through the mid and late 1970s. But now it's time for me to start talking and come to an end with that. And so let's talk metal in the comments down below. What things have I missed? Because I know there's a ton of other stuff that's probably out there that I'm just unfamiliar with or have slipped my mind and thus didn't get included tonight. So what are some other things that, either can contend for that title of earliest metal single in the US or show bits and pieces? Maybe they don't make it over the top, but you can tell that they were tooling around with some ideas, that they were getting closer and closer to that point where they could be recognized as heavy metal as we came to know it and love it in the 1980s. All right, let's bring this one to a close. Hope folks have enjoyed it. And as always, everybody stay safe and keep banging your head.